this is a moment that I never would have thought to put on the list myself. As you saw from the program, I was only at Patola for 1 year. At least one of my contemporaries, one of my predecessors at this podium, Rochelle Riley, at least she was there, grades 1 through 6. I was grade 1, period.
Raise your mic again.
Oh, sir.
Yeah, just think about it.
But
Yeah. There you go. See if that works. Just go ahead and speak.
right. Well, where I only had 1 year as an active member of the Patola community, my parents, Reggie and Judy Moss, as you know, had something like a combined 40 years. Dad had 11 as a teacher and coach, and mom 30-something as a librarian. So I will accept this award on their behalf as well as my own. And I want to and besides, we all know how many times we've heard of celebrities of different sorts, athletes, entertainers, who get honorary degrees from schools that they not only never attended, but never would have admitted them as freshmen. So what did I have to worry about? So we're asked at this function to talk about how our experiences in Tarboro and Excombe County affected us and our professional paths and the course that our professional and personal lives have taken us. And there are a couple of areas, many of which I've never revealed to anybody, so this will be pretty revealing in a lot of ways. But first, a question that I get quite often: how did Reginald Anthony Moss Jr. become Tony? All right, so the obvious answer is it's a short version of my middle name, Anthony, but that still leaves the question: who came up with the idea? Well, the folklore in the family is, and I'm sure Mom will be able to confirm it if I'm wrong. During our first years in Tallahassee, we spent a lot of time, obviously, at the home of Mom's parents, T.T. and Ivy Lewis. So we had Reginald Sr. and Reginald Jr., and Nana and Papa had a dog named Rex. The story goes, and I have no recollection, that if you called one of us, all three would show up. Something had to give, so the decision makers decided to base it on seniority. So I never had a chance at all. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. So, how did Tarboro affect? I have no hesitation in saying that one of the lesser aspects of growing up here, being part of that initial cohort in the Freedom of Choice program, is developing a low level of very intense hatred of white people. And I certainly had plenty of opportunities to practice that craft. Names that I remember from Bridges, a couple of them, George Etheridge and Sonny Brown. They were two of the classroom bullies who made life miserable for me and for guys like Frank Farrar, Howard Staten, I think Samuel Bryant, Whiteboard Bryant came to join us in the 3rd grade. They were the country kids who all of a sudden found these intruders in their midst in their all-white enclave at Bridges, and needless to say, their greetings were not very pleasant. And I remember in particular a teacher named Llewellyn Broom. First, never met anyone named Llewellyn before or since. Llewellyn Broom taught the class that the word V-I-N-E-G-A-R had 2 different pronunciations, like either and either, or slow and slow. Vinegar and vinegar. And it wasn't until after probably 3rd or 4th grade when I moved on to different teachers, I never heard anybody express it that way, that I knew that I had been had. Okay. And I could go through a whole list of microaggressions that took place over the years. Harry Jones, a history teacher at the senior high, whose favorite move was called the Brazilian hello sign. Basically, you get right up in your face and lay a middle finger, right? And this was not just me. As a matter of fact, he He was known for that move. There was a write-up about it in the school newspaper on Survival Press. So that was known. Move on to Wake Forest. God only knows why I picked that school, but that's another story for another day. If I had known that Jesse Holmes had been an alumnus, never would have happened. But for Wake Forest, I give you Mark Schubert, swimming instructor. Two things to remember about him. One was that I had a classmate from Robertsonville, Chinese American guy, Christopher Ng was his last name. In Mark Schubert's class, it was Chris Nick. And for some reason, it never occurred to me that I should one day just pull Chris aside and ask him, say, listen, how do you pronounce it? Didn't think about that. The other thing I remember about Mark Schubert is that he was the first person that I ever heard to describe the stereotype that black folks can't swim because we lack buoyancy. Well, in the first place, I got a B out of the class, so I must have been doing something right. And in the second place, he clearly never came to Clark Park back in the day to see the swim meets that we used to do down at the pool. So that note was easy to discard. But without realizing it, I had within me, and I came to realize many years later, I had the equivalent of a pool of lava bubbling around in my subconscious, which obviously, if I'm not aware of it, I can't do anything to address it. Fast forward, 1997, 98. We all remember the follies of Bill Clinton and his so-called bimbo eruptions, Paula Jones and Jennifer Flowers. So we all remember Clinton's attack dog, James Carville, and his legendary quote, drag a $100 bill through a trailer park and no telling what you might find. Which, of course, triggered a very long overdue discussion over the inappropriateness, the political incorrectness of the term trailer park trash. But here's what I flash back on. This took me back to Bridges. We had a North Carolina history course, the only one I remember from that year. One of the chapters in the textbook talked about the Reconstruction period and various social strata that existed during that time. At the top of the scale, of course, the equivalent of the Brahmins in the Indian caste system, you had the wealthy merchants, you had the plantation owners, you had shipping magnates if you lived down in Wilmington, Warhead City, or somewhere like that. And then on a lower level, you would have professional class, lawyers, doctors, small merchants, and what have you. And all the way down the line, kind of like going toward the bottom of the pyramid. We would have thought, before taking that class, that we as black folks, all of us newly freed by now, but still, you would have thought that we were at the bottom of the pyramid. We weren't. Let me describe to you the illustration that came with that chapter. A beaten down white man, maybe late 30s, early 40s, in rags, literally been jammed. Jay Clamper looked like Calvin Klein. A shack that gave new meaning to the term tumble down because it looked as if it would tip over if you got any kind of wind over 20 or 30 miles an hour. And a mule on the other side whose expression basically begged you to take it behind the barn and shoot it. Now, if I'm exaggerating the description of the illustration, I can promise you that I'm not exaggerating the caption that appeared underneath. And it read like this, and I quote, first three words in all caps. A poor white, even Negroes of the post-war Reconstruction period look down upon the so-called poor white trash.
I remember that.
You remember?
I do remember.
Okay, now, not only did that line appear in the caption, but in the paragraph describing that white underclass, that term reappeared. equating this to the Indian caste system, we were not the untouchables. They were. At some point, I don't know why that image popped in my head around that time. But I'll tell you what it made me think about. It made me think about the George Etheridges and the Sonny Browns. And what must they have felt when they read those lines? Here's a whole cohort of young children, 7, 8, 9 years old, just like we were, who had been bathed in an atmosphere of white superiority, black inferiority, viewing us as something less than human, viewing us in their minds as the untouchables. And now here they are in 3rd grade, and they have an authoritative text in front of them telling them, no, they are not the untouchables, they are not the trash, you are. Is it any wonder? Is it any wonder that so many of them lashed out in the way that they did? I thought about Llewellyn Broom. I know nothing about her background, but I had to wonder, did she come from similar circumstances? Did she get slapped in the face with the recognition, if it was the case, that she and her people were untouchables? And how could that have influenced the way that she approached me and the rest of the students? And keep in mind, I'm not only black, but I'm black and I got some brains. Now, if you want to talk about potential for intimidation and backlash, but these were things that I didn't feel like I could talk about. Not in Reggie and Judy's house, not under Coach Ross. I don't know for certain, I'll never know, but my assumption had always been that if I were to bring these microaggressions to their attention, Dad would pat me on the butt, go back out there, kid. You can handle this. You're going to have to do it sooner or later. I shut down. The things that I just described to you, these microaggressions, I've never discussed them with anybody before now. But that experience, as I look back on it, also gave me an appreciation for what I missed by not coming back to Potomac. I missed not having that community, that village outside of my parents, outside of the kids that Dad coached, outside of the other instructors like George Mathis and Pete Barnes, some of the people who were particularly close to our family and who we interacted with. Anna Barnes from St. Luke's Episcopal Church, people that knew what our capabilities were and could have provided us, and did provide the encouragement that we need to go for. I missed out on all that. I missed out on all that. But, funny how life comes around. When I read, or when I thought about the poor white trash passage, I thought about some of the white clients that I had butted heads with continuously over the first 11 years of my practice. And I had to ask, because a lot of them came up under similar circumstances to the George Etheridges and the Sonny Browns. So I had to wonder, is that how they're perceiving me? Are they seeing me as somebody who is looking down on them? For that, I had to take the next obvious step and ask, is that the vibe that I'm giving off without realizing? Take it a step further. Is it a racial thing necessarily? I mean, the clients that I have, by and large, especially the clients who are indigent, who are court-appointed, for most of them, the only thing that they have in common with me is skin color. They didn't grow up in an intact two-parent household. They didn't grow up on a McMillan Drive, where they had a village to keep them on the straight and narrow, which had a lot to do with why they became my clients in the first place. So I had to ask myself, am I conveying an attitude of condescension or contempt without realizing it that's impairing my ability to make the kind of connections that I have to in order to do my job as effectively. Because one of the things that makes debt building practice so intellectually challenging is that you have to develop relationships with your clients above and beyond, typical traffic cases or, any kind of civil litigation. Most of the time in cases of that nature, the question of who did what, when, how, where, all that's established. What it's on us to do, if we are in a position, if we are going to save our clients' lives, we have to get to the why. We have to be able to develop the kind of rapport with our clients that will enable them to bring out the kind of revelations of their lives that they wouldn't have shared with anybody, but which were so formative in their development and had such an immense impact on how they ended up on a criminal path, that if we don't explore those roots, we cannot be effective at our jobs. Now, obviously I couldn't go back to the clients that I had before to take a survey and ask them how I came across. And I admit that one of my less positive characteristics is that I don't take criticism very well, so I was not going to ask any of my current clients. I wasn't sure of what I would get in return. But what I could do proactively is to incorporate the lessons that I got from Bridges, the lesson that I picked up from that textbook. And I could make myself more emphatic, less inclined to talk, a better listener, a more emphatic advocate, and a better person all around, not only in the courthouse, but in my other endeavors. Let me tell you what happened this time last week. It kind of ties all this together. I had a client named Carlos Almonte who got popped during the Go Fast vessel, along with the co-defendant, off the coast of the Dominican Republic, carrying about 300 kilograms of cocaine. And it's a weird twist in drug law that you could have a shipment like this one was intended, going from Colombia to the Dominican Republic, not going any further, but because the vessel that I'm talking about had no flag, had no home port, no indication of nationality, under U.S. law, it is considered what they call a stateless vessel. And if the Coast Guard comes across and has any reason to believe that that vessel is carrying drugs, it can be stopped right there on the high seas because you're not in the territorial waters of another country. And the vessel has no state connection. So, the process in federal sentencing, once the client pleads guilty, they go through what's called a pre-sentence investigation interview, where a probation officer comes to the facility, or we meet, or if the client is out, we meet them at the probation office, and they take personal, social history, they get economic information, a lot of minimal background about the client's social history and how they got there. The PSI report is broad, but it's not very deep. It doesn't get into the whys as much as it does the hows and wherefores and so on. So in Carlos' situation, he goes in for his pre-sentence interview. I didn't make it that day for some reason. And when the report comes out, it shows that he mentioned when he was growing up in the Dominican Republic, he was 9 years old working as a shoe shine boy, and he was forced to perform oral sex on a customer. And that's all it said. But that one detail by itself raised a number of red flags, because Carlos, in the years leading up to this ill-fated venture, was very heavily addicted to cocaine and alcohol, and also to gambling and outside sex. A triad of addictions, you might say. So I knew that the report of his sexual assault had to be very significant, but the PSI Wasn't going to go into details. That was for me to do. So we went in a couple of weeks ago, as I was finishing up the sentencing memorandum, which is designed to fill in the gaps that the PSI report doesn't cover. So I went in, me and my investigator, who also acted as my interpreter, and we asked Carlos to tell us the story of what happened to him that day. What had happened was, he was working, like I said, as a shoe shine boy. He'd been doing that since the age of 8. Not as we would have done, just require a little spending money, a little pocket change, but because his family's poverty required him to do so. So one day, he's 9 years old, and he doesn't have a fixed location. He carries his gear in a box. And he walks up and down the streets of this little town, wherever tourists or business people might be congregating. That was how he worked. So one day he's walking past an apartment building, and some guy that he had never seen before was standing on the balcony and asked him to come in, make a house call. So Carlos, he's 9 years old. What is it? So he goes up, and he's about a half hour into doing the shine when the man walked up to him, unzipped his pants, grabbed Carlos behind his head, and forced him to perform fellatio. It seemed to him as he remembered it lasted for about half an hour. In the process, it was probably seemed longer than that. But he was finally able to extricate himself. He went around the corner somewhere near the building, and he cried, as you can imagine. And then what did he do? He picked up his box and went back on his route. Never told his parents, never told any of those in authority. The first time in 40 years that he had ever told anybody about what happened to him was when the probation officer during the pre-sentence interview asked him directly, and he wasn't going to lie. 40 years. But guess what, folks? You think I couldn't relate to that? You've heard me describe my time in Bridges. Wasn't that basically what I did? I get abused, go off on the corner, cry, and then try to come right back into that class and fit in as if nothing had ever happened. In writing that memorandum, I could feel his pain. Because now I was in a position where I could view that incident and its aftermath, not only through his eyes, but through mine. And to the extent that I can interject some degree of personal experience to the clients that I represent, to the sentencing packages that I do, the mitigation packages, when I'm making a case to a prosecutor to not seek the death penalty, or to a jury, and unfortunately I haven't had to do that in about 20-some years, but to ask a jury to spare the life of a client who's taken the life of another human being. You cannot adequately do that job if you're not willing to put yourself in the position of the client, to see his world through his eyes. But if you can see the world through his eyes and your lens, how much more powerful can your presentation be? Had it not been for James Carville, had it not been for that trailer park discussion back in 97, 98, I don't know if I ever would have recalled the lesson from that North Carolina history textbook. But I can never be grateful enough that that insight came as it did. That one last and one twist. That third grade history class, it was taught by the Wallen Group. Talk about coming full circle. So here I stand, 65 years old last month. This feels like vindication. This is the first time ever that I've been asked to be a keynote speaker at a function of this nature. The fact that it is with this group, this village, these stalwarts, those of you here in the room and those of us who couldn't make it. The fact that I have this honor in front of this group is priceless beyond measure. And I can say very little except thank you.